Every now and again I'll be talking to someone and we'll be talking about how many lawyers leave the profession so quickly in the first few years, and they'll say something like, yeah, it's such a pity, that's a terrible thing. And I'll say, no, I'm not sure you're right about that. Sometimes it can be a good thing, and that's what we're talking about today in the Tips for Lawyers show. Okay, so you've heard the statistics probably, or if not, then you've got a good feel for it. Lots and lots of lawyers leave the profession within the first few years of practice. And the question is always about the numbers, and they look at who's leaving, but I think we're not necessarily asking the right questions, because it's not inherently a bad thing for someone to leave the legal profession within the first few years of practice, because across the board there will be many different reasons why people are leaving the profession in the first few years. For my part, I think it's going to be much better if you have decided that law is not for you, if you are struggling in the profession not because of the kind of training you're getting or because you've experienced some bad things, but by and large if you are genuinely disliking the practice of law and what it entails, then perhaps you should leave. Perhaps that's going to actually be the better option for you and you should be pursuing something else, because every year, every 5 years, every 10 years that you stay in the profession that you hate is inevitably going to decrease your levels of satisfaction with your life. You're going to obviously be headed towards a certain amount of unhappiness, and you're going to be dragging yourself into work every day. And frankly, in a job as hard as what a lawyer can be, that's not exactly an ideal situation. So let's start with this fundamental premise. Only people who actually want to be lawyers should stay in the profession. And so within that, we've got to think about a few things. We've got to think about this. Why is it that people, when they become lawyers, suddenly realize that in fact they don't want to be lawyers? And sometimes that happens in the first few months potentially, or the first year, and then it takes them a few years to realize that it's not necessarily changing for the better, and so they leave. And the reason is that, at least one reason, is that they don't know what it is they're getting themselves in for in the first place. So if I ask around and I ask people, why did you study law in the first place? There are going to be a variety of answers. And I've asked a lot of people this question, and so I'm always interested in the answers. And the questions vary quite wildly. Sometimes we get people who are genuinely interested in helping a certain category of people. They've had some experiences in their life, or they have a particular passion, and they want to help some particular category of people. So let's follow them through on their path for a minute. These people did law as a degree, so they studied law, which is very different from the practice of law, but they studied law in order to achieve a goal, which was getting the piece of paper that would give them permission to then practice in a way that would help the people. And this is a long-term plan, so it takes a lot of grind and it takes a lot of hard work to get that piece of paper to allow you to even start to help the people in the way that you had anticipated helping those people. And what a lot of people who had this as their goal find is that they don't have the same opportunity they were hoping they might have to help people in the way that they were hoping to help them. What do I mean? I mean there's an expectations mismatch. They went in perhaps a little idealistic about what they might be able to achieve or the job they might be able to get, and they come out the other end and they perhaps can only get one job in one firm in one particular location who doesn't even practice in the area that allows them to help the people in the way they thought. And so what they need to do is then decide, is this sufficiently meeting the goal that I set for myself when I wanted to study law in the first place? Or is this so far removed from what it is that I had anticipated that in fact I should leave the law and find another way to help those people, or find another way to pursue that goal? And so what has happened is there's been this mismatch in expectations. Perhaps they were unrealistic, perhaps the landscape changed. It's not necessarily a blame game, but it would be right for them to leave the law and leave legal practice, at least in a private practice sense, if that was their situation. And that doesn't necessarily mean that law is evil. It doesn't necessarily mean that they went crazy. It just means that they're making good decisions. because they shouldn't stay in the career. So that's possibility one. Someone was idealistically hoping to help someone and they find they can't do that for whatever reason. Now, there's other reasons, of course. Now, there are people out there who, despite every piece of common sense available to them, somewhere in their subconscious continue to believe what legal practice is like, and they create their image of what legal practice is like from television. Yes, from Suits, from Boston Legal, from The Firm, whatever your situation may be, LA Law, depending on what generation you're from, and they go into law thinking it's going to be like this, and in fact it's like this. And they might be this far apart, and they might be this far apart. Now, nobody actually thinks consciously to themselves that legal practice is like that, but we are influenced by watching these things, and somewhere just in the back of our head we sometimes think that things are like that. And so what happens then? We go into study law and we think, when I get out of studying law, I'm going to be this high-powered, all-knowledgeable graduate who has all this information, because that's what I've seen people are like on TV. And then you get into legal practice and you realize that in fact it bears no resemblance to that. There's a lot more paperwork, there's a lot more administration, there's a lot more meetings that aren't actually that interesting, and there's a lot of things you need to do which are not the things you envisaged you would be doing all day. And so you then need to juggle. You need to think, is this so far removed from my expectation of reality that I should leave the law and pursue something else? Is it something that if I stick with it for a bit longer, it will more closely resemble a reality, because life as a junior lawyer is different to life as a senior lawyer, and perhaps I need to keep trucking and just get through those early years? But, of course, inherent in this is a big problem, and I think personally it's a big contributor to why a lot of people are leaving law, which is that there was a complete ignorance about what legal practice was actually like at the time they started their law degree. Total ignorance. And partly that is because there's not a lot of information out there. Partly it's because it's very hard to describe what legal practice is actually like until you have experienced what legal practice is like. But I think one of the most valuable things that a young aspiring law student might do, if you're in your senior years and you're selecting law or you're interested in law, find a lawyer. Find someone who does what you hope to do and ask them what it's really like. Don't just say, hey, do you like being a lawyer? They'll say yes or no or maybe or sometimes. I mean, there's a limited number of answers. That's an insufficient question to understand what legal practice is like. Ask them what they do during the day. Get them to explain a few days to you. Ask them, what'd you do on Monday? What'd you do on Tuesday? What'd you do on Wednesday? Get them to break it down, and you're going to be taking up some of their time, so hopefully it's someone you either know well or who at least is prepared to volunteer that time for you. Because what legal practice looks like from the outside in is very different to what legal practice is like when you're making it. It's a lot like sausages. You've probably heard that. No one wants to really see how the sausage is made. They just want to eat it at the end. So it's a lot like that, and you need to drill down what is a day actually like as a lawyer. What happens? How much contact do you have with clients? How many lunches do you have in a week at fancy restaurants? How much paperwork do you do? How many meetings do you have about marketing and admin and things that you might not necessarily find that interesting? So if you really want to know what law is like and avoid that expectations mismatch, ask good questions before you get into law. Now, the third thing that happens, of course, is that people study law, they're enjoying it, they might get some work experience, and then they get a job and they get lumbered with people that aren't great people. Law, like every profession, is full of a wide variety of personalities, and some of them are not very good to work for. That's just the reality of it. Unfortunately, for a very junior lawyer, this can be a highly damaging experience. And for some, it is damaging enough that they leave the law. And look, personally, I think that is an indictment on the profession. Most of the lawyers I know are genuinely reasonable and good people, but some of them are terrible managers. Some of them are horrible people. I don't know many of them, to be honest. Most lawyers, given half a chance to be decent people, will be decent people. But they might also be decent people but terrible managers, and they can be very hard to work for as well. So what are you going to do in that situation? Obviously, jobs are few and far between at the moment. It's a little bit harder to get a job unless you're a superstar in every dimension. But if you're lucky enough to get a job, you might not be able to get another job in short order. And that's going to make things very challenging for you. I think it's important when you have invested 4 or 5 years of your life and a decent chunk of money into studying law and then getting admitted as a lawyer potentially, I think it's important that you take a little bit of time to assess, is the way you are being treated really fundamental to your experience of law? Don't create a norm out of your experience, is what I'm saying. Because just because you're experiencing something terrible in a particular situation doesn't mean that every situation will be like that. And perhaps what you need to do is duck out of that situation. It's going to be hard to find a job, I accept that, but your longer term success and your longer term mental health, frankly, might depend on that. So be bold in those sorts of decisions, but if you need to make a move, make a move. Don't convince yourself that what you're experiencing is going to be the same as what you experience everywhere. There are a wide variety of places to work, there are a wide variety of people to work for, and you might just need to make that change before you get out of law as your first resort. And of course, the other thing that happens over time is that people find that they're not advancing or that they have other interests. And you've got to make a decision. Do you want to pursue those interests full-time? Do you want to pursue those interests part-time? Can you get some flexible work hours? And some people simply leave because they decide that they are more passionate about something else. It's not necessarily because they hate law. It's not necessarily because they needed to get out. It's just because they have other interests, so they want to pursue them as well. Thankfully, in our modern society, more and more jobs are coming up. Law is still very traditional, but more and more jobs are coming up where you can explore that flexibility while still retaining your legal practice. And that might be something you want to explore as well. So I think when we look at not everyone should be lawyers as our topic, then we need to consider why people are leaving law. We need to look at, should they have become a lawyer in the first place? Were they perhaps not geared up for becoming a lawyer? And that really leads into my final point for today about whether people should become lawyers or not, which is this. Some people decide to do law because it seems like a good lark, or because they got good grades at uni, or because they were good at debating. And I've been through these reasons before, so I'm not going to go over them again. And some of those are terrible, terrible reasons to invest 4 years of your life and tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands, in a law degree. It will not keep you motivated. Law is not as well paid as what you think. Whatever you think, make it less and you might be more accurate. It is not as exciting as what you think. And if you go in eyes wide open rather than just convincing yourself that law is a good thing to do because you got good grades at uni, then I think you might have a better idea of exactly what it's like. Just do some research if you're in that boat. If you're thinking about doing law, do some research. What is law like? What do they do during the day? What are the practice areas? What might you end up doing? Picture yourself in the practice of law and what you're doing after having this conversation with real lawyers, and see what it is that you feel as you do that. And for all that happens, some people decide they just don't like law very much at all and they want to do something else, and I think that's fair enough. There are bad things that happen, but that's not everything. Some people shouldn't be lawyers, some people should be lawyers, some people should be lawyers but not in the environment they're in. There are lots of variables here. Let's try to deal with them properly and subtly and not go big picture and just go lots of people are leaving law, it's a terrible thing, because sometimes it's the right thing. That's all I had for today. Don't forget to subscribe. tipsforlawyers.com/YouTube for the channel, tipsforlawyers.com/iTunes for the iTunes feed. Leave a ranking, leave a review, and I will see you next time.